Chapter 2 in the Rawls and Bean book that we're using for Social Science 110, California Studies, talks about the original Californians. Anthropologists believe that the Aboriginal population of California was originally made up of people who crossed the land bridge, which existed between North America and Asia, way up around where Alaska and Russia are today, during the glaciation of the late Pleistocene epoch. Now, if you've taken any kind of science class at all, physical science, you know that in Earth system history, there are times when there's a lot of ice covering the poles and extending farther south or north of each pole, respectively, on Earth. And there are times when the ice retreats somewhat. So right now, we're not in a glaciation, but we're kind of in an interglaciation, as it were. But during the late Pleistocene, quite a lot of ice covered what is today North America. And because of that, there was more ice tied up in the solid form than the liquid form. So the ocean levels were lower. Therefore, there was a land bridge between what is today Alaska and what is today Russia. And these people originally, they say, the anthropologists, crossed from the Eurasian continent to the North American continent during the time the land bridge existed. So what we had here eventually was a sophisticated and diverse cultural landscape that was in place long before the Europeans got to what we call California, arriving in the very late 15th and early 16th century. Estimates by anthropologists suggest that there may have been a population of at least 300,000 Native Americans around the late 1700s, which was kind of a pivotal point in the European conquest of this part of the world, when those populations then started to decrease from disease and death and all kinds of things. This graphic shows you, in fact, the Bering Land Bridge, which is theorized more than 12,000 years ago. On the left, you can see that land bridge in theory when more of Earth's water was tied up as ice between what is today Alaska, what is today Russia, and then what that area looks like today. And this is courtesy of the U.S. Geologic Survey. California's Aborigines did not have metal tools, so when the Europeans got here, well, they thought they were backwards. Well, look at that. They don't even have iron tools. They're still on the Stone Age. Europeans, due to those racist attitudes and beliefs, thought that the Native Americans of California, therefore, were inferior. But in reality, California's diverse physical geography produced an environment in which peoples were very geographically isolated. These various tribes in California really did not communicate with each other much because there were interspersed mountains, there were river valleys, there were canyons, there were deserts that kind of separated these people, and that's why there was not a lot of regular interaction between these Native American tribes in early California. So this isolation allowed California to support a larger Native American population than any other region of comparable size in North America. Over time, California Indians developed a vast knowledge and understanding of their natural environment, natural resources, things they could use for food, things they could use for tools, water use, all of those things. And that knowledge was amended from generation to generation and passed down, to the next generation. We now know that Native Americans in California were a lot more sophisticated than anthropologists originally thought, especially with respect to enhancing their natural environment, like selecting the strongest plants to grow for food and that sort of thing, in order to become more productive with respect to food. In fact, the book quotes in Chapter 2 a geographer by the name of William Preston, who recently characterized California as, quote, one of the most altered pre-colonial landscapes in the Americas. So these folks were already in the business of specializing and finding crops that were hardier, finding plant stocks that were hardier, and finding better ways of hunting and gathering. And that knowledge is passed on from one generation to the next. So because of this, food was remarkably diverse and often ingeniously obtained. The acorn, of course, was a staple. You could make porridge out of it. Bread came from the flour, but of course, before it was really palatable, they had to extract from the acorns that were ground up to tannic acid to make a flour out of it, and so on, to make bread and then to make porridge. They obviously hunted for deer and small game. They got freshwater fish in the inland waterways, the rivers and lakes, and of course ocean fish and shellfish along the California coast. There's a graphic of an Indian woman gathering acorns in California. This is from instructor resources that we as instructors have available connected with this textbook that we're using. Containers, vessels, cooking baskets were woven very, very tightly so that, in fact, they were all woven very tightly. They could actually hold boiling water. Along the coast, like the central coast, especially down towards Santa Barbara, the Chumash Indians used to use tar that would wash up on the beaches from the undersea offshore oil in order to seal those baskets. In fact, I bet you didn't know this, maybe some of you do, that how could you imagine a place like Pismo Beach got its name? Well, Pismo was the Chumash word, I understand, for tar, and they used that tar to actually make their baskets stronger. Now, in the southeastern part of California, adjacent to what is today Arizona, that's where you would find more clay pottery. Hunting and fishing was mainly done by men. Women mainly cooked and gathered. Hunting was mainly by bow, and fishing was done with various nets and hooks. What you're seeing here in the picture is a Miwok basket. The Miwok Indians lived in and around the Sacramento Valley and the adjacent foothills up in the Sacramento area. This picture comes from our McGraw-Hill instructor resources. The picture of Indians as lazy is a result of the demoralization that set in after the coming of the Europeans, who basically treated them as if they were inferior beings and seemed intent on proving that they were. So we've seen this time and again in history with colonization, where one group of people that felt they were superior to the other subjugated the other, and so on. There was a negative term called digger, which was attributed to Native American women because it was thought by the Europeans that these people couldn't grow food, they couldn't hunt for food, they were digging for their food by finding roots. But actually, they were looking for root fibers for basket making, not for food consumption. So it's not an appropriate term to use, and never was. This is a picture of a sweat house in the early 1920s, which was used by the Hupa tribe, which is way up in northwest California, inland from the coast. This is a picture that's public domain, courtesy Library of Congress. Dwellings in general were often conical or dome-shaped. This sweat house, or any version of a sweat house in Native American culture, was a distinctive institution, generally used by men for ritual bathing. It was a man thing. Okay, it's like going to the pub or something like that. Boats were made out of tule balsa. Dugout canoes are made by Chumash of Santa Barbara down around the central coast, and also the north coast tribes. But the Chumash tend to use planks of wood, and in the north coast they actually dug out the tree, got the cellulose out, and then used the bark as the canoe. Generally speaking, men did not wear clothing, and women wore kind of grass skirts for freedom of movement. And of course, in the wintertime, they all used furs for warmth as a practical thing. This is a map courtesy Orange County Office of Education, which shows, much like the map in your book, the different regions of Native Americans in California, as anthropologists over time have sort of divvied them up. Most California Indians lived in villages of 100 to 150 people, usually in groups of kindred families, related families. There were 5 main stocks of languages that were divided into 21 language families, then further divided into about 100 mutually unintelligible languages. This is quite extraordinary when you think about this. What a diverse place this was before the Europeans even got here. If you can imagine, the place we call California today had 100 distinct unintelligible languages that were spoken. There were about 100 tribes, most without a central government, so to speak, except for the Mojave tribe and the Yuma tribe of southeast California near the Colorado River. They were a lot more centralized in their governance. So as you look at this map once again, you can see how scholars have divided California into 6 major geographically distinct culture areas, within which residents shared common traits. They are the Southern Indians, the Central Indians, the Northwestern, the Northeastern, the Great Basin, and of course the Colorado River, just like the map shows you. Uh, Generally speaking, the tribes were peaceable, except for tribes along the Colorado River, which were more militant and combatant in nature. Amongst the tribes, gambling was widespread. Money was in the form of strings of beads made with, teeth from animals, dentalia, or clamshells. Marriage was a formal and honored institution, and divorce was something that was very hard to get in Native American culture in California. Women were essential in these cultures. Along the southern coast, the Chumash women often ruled small villages. In the northwest part of California, women served as spiritual leaders and shaman. In fact, religion and medical skills were combined in the form of the person in the tribe called the shaman, which could be women as well as men. Here we see a Hupa shaman woman, a photograph of from the early 1920s from the Library of Congress, public domain. And then from our McGraw-Hill instructor resources, a picture of a Yurok woman with a basket hat that you can see. The Yuroks also lived in parts of the Central Valley, I believe. There were ceremonial observances in many of these tribes associated with adolescence, with mourning, with the first fruit, the first salmon, the first acorn festivals, and so on. There were widespread religious cults. And the Native Americans of California believed that all of nature was interconnected and was suffused with a sacred power. There's a great quote in chapter 2 from American historian Edward Castillo, who himself was part of is part of a California Indian tribe from Southern California. It's a great quote in chapter 2, and don't miss that quote once you're reading the chapter. Um, of course, the European Christian idea, quite juxtaposed to this, was that all human beings were sinful and fallen creatures. This was a philosophy that was foreign to the Native Americans in general, and especially of those of California. There was no regular system of writing that anthropologists have been able to determine amongst the Native Americans of California. And that ends our presentation of Chapter 2.